In the heart of Monterrey, a city that breathes tradition and modernity in equal parts, hides a story that challenges everything we think we know about love, loyalty, and family ties. What would happen if you discovered that the person you trust the most kept a secret that could destroy your entire world? How far would you be able to go to protect your happiness? This is the story of Elena Guzman, a woman whose seemingly perfect life collapsed on a night of horror, leaving behind a mystery that shook the foundations of Monterrey society. It all started on a quiet summer night in the exclusive neighborhood of Los Pinos. The streets, normally filled with the bustle of families and children playing, were plunged into an unusual silence, as if the very air sensed the tragedy that was about to unfold. On Jacaranda Street, known for its imposing mansions and perfectly manicured gardens, stood the residence of the Guzmans, a family respected and envied in equal measure. Elena Guzman, 42 years old, was the personification of success and elegance. A successful businesswoman, devoted wife, and loving mother of two, she seemed to have it all. Her husband, Carlos Guzman, was a construction magnate, known both for his prosperous businesses and his overwhelming charisma. Together, they were Monterrey's golden couple, always present at charity events and on the covers of local magazines. But behind the doors of his luxurious mansion, a storm was brewing. Elena had noticed subtle changes in Carlos's behavior in recent months. Calls at odd hours, more frequent business trips, and an emotional distance that grew day by day. At first, Elena tried to ignore her suspicions, attributing them to the stress of work and the challenges of maintaining a business empire. However, doubt, once sown, is like a weed that grows uncontrolled. It was on a warm April afternoon when Elena made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, she contacted Javier Molina, a private investigator recommended by a close friend. Elena knew she was crossing a line, but the need to know the truth outweighed any moral scruples. Molina, a former police officer with an impeccable reputation, accepted the case with some reluctance. There was something in Elena's eyes, a mix of determination and fear, that warned her that this would be no ordinary case of infidelity. Over the next few weeks, Molina followed Carlos's every move, meticulously documenting his comings and goings, his phone calls, and his encounters. What Molina discovered surpassed Elena's worst nightmares. Carlos wasn't just being unfaithful. He was having a passionate relationship with someone close to him, someone who frequented his own home. The photographs and recordings left no room for doubt. Carlos' lover was none other than Sofia, the wife of Elena's younger brother. Elena's world fell apart in an instant. The betrayal came not only from her husband, but also from someone she considered a sister. Images of family meals, shared vacations, and exchanged confidences turned bitter in his memory, contaminated by lies and deception. But Elena Guzman was not a woman who let herself be defeated easily. Born into a middle-class family, she had fought hard to get to where she was. Initial rage gave way to cold, calculating determination. He decided to confront Carlos, not with shouts and accusations, but with a carefully planned strategy. On the night of May 15th, Elena prepared a special dinner. She dressed in her best dress, set the table with the finest china, and uncorked a bottle of Carlos' favorite wine. When her husband came home, tired after a long day at work, he was pleasantly surprised by the scene. During dinner, the conversation flowed like old times. Carlos, relaxed by the wine and the seemingly romantic atmosphere, let his guard down. It was then that Elena, with a calm that masked the storm inside her, put the evidence of infidelity on the table. Carlos's reaction went from surprise to panic, and finally to defeated resignation. Between tears and pleas, he confessed everything. The affair with Sofia had started as an innocent flirtation at a family party, but it quickly turned into a passion that neither of them could control. Elena listened in silence, her face an impenetrable mask. When Carlos finished his confession, she simply got up from the table and went up to her room, leaving her husband immersed in a sea of guilt and remorse. What Carlos didn't know, what no one knew, was that Elena had made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. In the days that followed, while pretending to consider the forgiveness Carlos begged for, Elena put a meticulous plan into motion. She contacted a reputable divorce lawyer, transferred large sums of money to secret offshore accounts, and began collecting evidence of the financial irregularities she knew Carlos had committed over the years. His intention was not just to get a divorce. She wanted to destroy Carlos, take away everything she valued, just as he had taken away her confidence and happiness. But fate, that capricious writer of our lives, had other plans. On the night of May 30th, while Elena was working in her study, finalizing the details of her revenge, she heard a noise on the ground floor of the house. Thinking it might be Carlos returning early from a business trip, he went downstairs. What she found in the living room left her cold. Standing in the middle of the room was Anna, her younger sister. Anna's eyes, normally warm and smiling, shone with a feverish intensity. In his right hand he held a pistol, the weapon Carlos kept in the safe for protection. "I know everything, Elena," Anna said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I know about Carlos and Sofia. I know about your divorce plan. I know everything." Elena, bewildered, tried to calm her sister. But as Anna spoke, an even more twisted truth began to reveal itself. It wasn't just infidelity that tormented Anna. It was a deep, deep-rooted envy of Elena that had been growing for years. Anna confessed through tears how she had always lived in the shadow of her older sister. Elena, the successful one, the beautiful one, the perfect one. While Elena built empires and lived in mansions, Anna struggled to maintain a stable job and a mediocre marriage. The revelation of Carlos's infidelity had been for Anna not a tragedy, but an opportunity, a chance to finally see her sister fall from her pedestal. It was Anna who had hired the private investigator, not to help Elena, but to find a weakness that she could exploit. His plan was to blackmail Carlos and Sofia, use the information to gain power and money. But when she discovered that Elena already knew everything and was planning her own revenge, something broke inside Anna. In a moment of madness fueled by years of resentment and jealousy, Anna pointed the gun at Elena. The shot echoed in the stillness of the night, a sound that would forever change the fate of the Guzman family. Elena fell to the ground, her white dress quickly turning red. Anna, horrified by what she had just done, dropped the gun and fled the house, leaving behind a scene that would soon become the center of one of the most intriguing criminal investigations in Monterrey's recent history. Detective Juan Mendoza, a police veteran with a reputation for solving impossible cases, was assigned to the investigation. From the beginning, something about the crime scene didn't add up. Although the house showed signs of a burglary, Mendoza noticed details that suggested the scene had been tampered with. The following weeks were a whirlwind of police activity. Mendoza and his team questioned dozens of witnesses, analyzed hours of security camera recordings, and followed clues that took them from the most exclusive neighborhoods of Monterrey to the darkest corners of the city. Carlos Guzman, devastated by the death of his wife and consumed by guilt, became the main suspect. His alibi for the night of the crime, an alleged business trip to Mexico City, quickly crumbled under police scrutiny. Sofia, Elena's sister-in-law, also fell under suspicion. Investigators discovered that he had made several calls to Elena in the days before the murder, and his behavior during interrogations was erratic and contradictory. Meanwhile, Anna had disappeared. Her absence at Elena's funeral raised suspicions, but her husband insisted that she had gone on a trip days before the crime. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Elena's phone, initially missing, was found in a trash can near the crime scene. Forensic technicians managed to recover deleted messages and calls that shed new light on the case. Among the recovered messages were a series of exchanges between Elena and Anna that revealed a much more complex relationship than anyone had suspected. The sisters had been in constant contact in the days before the murder, discussing Carlos's infidelity and Elena's plans for divorce. But it was a voicemail left by Anna the night of the crime that finally broke the case. In the recording, Anna, with a trembling voice, said, "Elena, I'm sorry. I never wanted things to go this far. Please forgive me." With this new evidence, Mendoza intensified the search for Anna. Finally, after 2 weeks of intense searching, they found her in a small coastal town, hiding in a rented cabin under a false name. Anna's interrogation was an emotional roller coaster. At first, she denied any involvement in the crime, but faced with the evidence, her facade began to crumble. In a heartbreaking moment, Ana finally confessed, revealing the full truth behind Elena's murder. Ana's confession shook the Monterrey community to its foundations. The image of the Guzman sisters, once a symbol of success and family unity, had been transformed into a tragic story of envy, betrayal, and death. The trial that followed was one of the most high-profile in recent Mexican history. Ana was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Carlos and Sofia, although they were not directly accused of Elena's death, saw their lives and reputations destroyed by the scandal. In the months and years that followed, the Guzman case became the subject of countless articles, books, and documentaries. Psychologists and sociologists analyzed the family dynamics that had led to such a tragedy, while the public remained fascinated by each new detail that came to light. For Detective Mendoza, the Guzman case represented both the highlight of his career and his greatest personal challenge. Solving the crime earned him national recognition, but it also left him deeply marked. In later interviews, Mendoza often reflected on how one act of betrayal could set off a series of events that destroyed an entire family. The legacy of the Guzman case endured in the collective memory of Monterrey. The mansion on Jacaranda Street, once a symbol of success and happiness, stood empty for years, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. For those who knew Elena Guzman, her memory was tinged with a sad irony. A woman who had worked her entire life to build a perfect family, only to watch it fall apart from the very forces she was trying to control: ambition, jealousy, and secrets. The Guzman case became a modern parable about the dangers of appearances and the real cost of success. In the salons and cafes of Monterrey, people continued debating the events of that fateful night, wondering what they would have done in the place of Elena, Carlos, Ana. But perhaps the most profound lesson of the Guzman case was about the unpredictable nature of the human heart. How love can turn into hate, how loyalty can turn into betrayal, and how, sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who can hurt us the most. As the city of Monterrey moved forward, the lives touched by the Guzman case were forever altered. Once a titan of industry, Carlos retired from public life, dedicating the rest of his days to charity work in an attempt to redeem his legacy. Sofia, unable to bear the guilt and public scrutiny, moved abroad, where she attempted to rebuild her life under a new name. And in a state prison cell, Ana Guzman spent her days reflecting on the decisions that led her to that point. In rare interviews over the years, he spoke of regret, the toxicity of envy, and how a moment of madness can change the course of many lives. The Guzman case was etched in the history of Monterrey as a grim reminder of the complexities of the human soul. A story that began with the promise of the Mexican-American dream and ended in a nightmare of betrayal and death. A story that reminds us that, sometimes, reality can be stranger and more tragic than any fiction. For the residents of Monterrey, the Guzman case became an urban legend, a cautionary tale that was passed down from generation to generation. Parents used it as a warning about the dangers of greed and envy, while young people saw it as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Over the years, the Guzman mansion on Jacaranda Street became a place of macabre pilgrimage. Despite authorities' efforts to keep onlookers away, it was common to see groups of people gathering in front of the property, especially on the anniversary of the crime. Some swore they saw the figure of Elena wandering the gardens on full moon nights, a ghost trapped between two worlds, unable to find peace. The impact of the case extended beyond the borders of Monterrey. It became a topic of study in law and criminology schools throughout Mexico, analyzing every detail of the investigation and subsequent trial. The students debated Ana's motives, the moral culpability of Carlos and Sofia, and the decisions made by Detective Mendoza during the investigation. For the business community of Monterrey, the Guzman case was a hard blow. The fall of one of its most prominent families generated a wave of introspection and self-criticism. Many wondered if the pressure to maintain an image of success and perfection had contributed to the tragedy. As a result, several companies implemented wellness and work-life balance programs in an attempt to prevent excessive ambition from leading their employees down dark paths. Detective Juan Mendoza, for his part, was never able to completely put the Guzman case behind him. Although he solved many other crimes throughout his career, none marked him as much as this one. In his memoirs, published years after his retirement, he dedicated an entire chapter to reflecting on the case. He wrote about the fine line between love and hate, and how family relationships can be both a source of strength and destruction. Ana Guzman, in her confinement, became a complex and contradictory figure. Some saw her as a monster, unable to overcome her own jealousy to the point of committing fratricide. Others, however, considered her to be another victim of the social and family pressures that had led to this tragedy, and herself oscillated between periods of deep regret and moments of bitter justification. In an interview granted 10 years after the crime, Ana spoke for the first time in detail about the night of the murder. Her voice cracking with emotion, she described how, the moment she pulled the trigger, a part of her died too. "Not only did I take Elena's life," he said, "I also destroyed my own existence and that of everyone I loved. There isn't a day that I don't wish I could go back and change what I did." The case also had repercussions on the way Mexican society viewed family relationships and success. It sparked a national debate about the pressure on women to be perfect in all aspects of their lives, as wives, mothers, professionals, and public figures. Many argued that this unsustainable pressure had been a contributing factor in the Guzman tragedy. Elena and Carlos's children, caught in the center of this media whirlwind, struggled for years to find their place in the world. The eldest, following in his mother's footsteps, became a successful businessman, but always kept a low profile, avoiding the spotlight that had attracted his parents so much. The youngest, deeply affected by the loss of her mother and the betrayal of her aunt, found solace in art, becoming a renowned painter whose works often explored themes of loss, betrayal, and redemption. Over time, the Guzman case became a symbol of how family secrets and social expectations can create a perfect storm of tragedy. Psychologists and sociologists cited it as an extreme example of how dysfunctional family dynamics can lead to catastrophic consequences. 20 years after the crime, a documentary titled The Guzman Sisters: Love, Hate, and Tragedy revived interest in the case. The documentary, which included interviews with Carlos Guzman, Elena's children, and even a brief appearance from Ana from prison, offered new perspectives on the events leading up to that fateful night. The documentary also explored the lasting impact of the case on the Monterrey community. It showed how the city, known for its entrepreneurial spirit and strong sense of community, had been deeply shaken by tragedy. Many residents spoke of how the case had made them reevaluate their own lives and relationships, placing more emphasis on authenticity and less on appearances. In one of the documentary's most powerful scenes, Carlos Guzman, visibly aged by the weight of guilt and remorse, visited Elena's grave for the first time in 2 decades. With tears in his eyes, he asked his late wife for forgiveness, acknowledging how her selfishness and weakness had set off a series of events that destroyed his entire family. The Guzman case left an indelible mark in the history of Monterrey and in the collective conscience of Mexico. It became an enduring reminder of how appearances can be deceiving, how familial love can transform into its darkest opposite, and how a single decision can alter the course of many lives. As the years passed, the impact of the Guzman case continued to reverberate in Mexican society. In universities, it became a recurring topic of study in the faculties of psychology, law, and sociology. Students analyzed every aspect of the case, from the toxic family dynamics to the legal proceedings that led to Ana's conviction. On the 30th anniversary of the crime, the Autonomous University of Nuevo León organized a symposium titled The Legacy of the Guzman Case, 3 decades later. The event brought together experts from various disciplines to discuss the long-term ramifications of the tragedy. Among the speakers was Maria Guzman, Elena and Carlos's youngest daughter, now a respected psychologist specializing in family therapy. Maria, who had spent years dealing with the trauma of losing her mother and discovering her aunt's betrayal, spoke eloquently about how the tragedy had shaped her life and career. "My family's case became a catalyst for my decision to study psychology," he explained. "I wanted to understand how family dynamics can become so toxic that they lead to unimaginable acts of violence." His presentation, titled Beyond Appearances: Unraveling the Threads of the Guzman Case, offered a unique and personal perspective on events that had fascinated the public for decades. Maria spoke about the pressure she felt from a young age to maintain a facade of perfection, and how that same pressure had contributed to her family's tragedy. "My mother, Elena, was seen as the epitome of success," Maria said. "Successful businesswoman, devoted wife, loving mother. But behind that perfect image was a woman struggling with her own insecurities and fears. My Aunt Anna, on the other hand, lived in my mother's shadow, consumed by an envy that grew to become something monstrous." Maria also spoke about the lasting impact the case had had on her older brother, Carlos Jr. "My brother chose a different path," she explained. "While I sought to understand and heal through psychology, he immersed himself in the business world, almost as if he wanted to prove that our family's legacy was more than this tragedy." Maria's presentation sparked passionate debate among attendees. Many praised her bravery in speaking so openly about such a personal and painful topic. Others questioned whether it was ethical to use a family tragedy as a case study, even for educational purposes. One of the most powerful moments of the symposium was when Maria shared excerpts from the letters her Aunt Anna had sent her from prison over the years. "At first, I refused to read them," Maria confessed. "But over time, I realized that I needed to understand, not to forgive, but to heal." Anne's letters revealed a woman tormented by remorse and guilt. In one of them, he wrote, "Every day I wake up thinking about Elena, about the life I took from her, about the family I destroyed. There is no punishment enough for what I did. I live in a prison, not only physically, but also in my mind and my heart." The symposium also featured Javier Molina, the private investigator Elena had originally hired to follow Carlos. Molina, now retired, spoke about how the Guzman case had changed his perspective on his profession. "When Elena hired me, I thought it was another routine case of infidelity," Molina explained. "I never imagined I would be unraveling the threads of a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. This case taught me that even seemingly perfect families can hide dark and dangerous secrets." Molina shared never-before-revealed details about his investigation, including conversations he had with Elena in the days before her death. Elena was determined to confront Carlos and Sofia, he revealed. But she also mentioned that she was worried about Anna. She said that her sister had been acting strangely, almost obsessively, about the situation. "In retrospect, I wonder if we could have prevented the tragedy if we had paid more attention to those warning signs." Warning. Detective Juan Mendoza, now retired, also participated in the symposium via video conference. Despite the years that had passed, Mendoza spoke passionately about the case that had defined his career. "The Guzman case taught me that in crime, as in life, things are rarely what they seem," he reflected. "We started out thinking we were dealing with a robbery gone wrong, and ended up uncovering a web of lies, jealousy, and betrayal that spanned years." Mendoza shared how the case had changed his focus in subsequent investigations. "After the Guzmans, I learned to look beyond the physical evidence," he explained. "I started paying more attention to family dynamics, to the little inconsistencies in people's stories, to those seemingly insignificant details that can be the key to solving a case." One of the most emotional moments of the symposium was when a video sent by Carlos Guzman from the retreat where he lived was shown. Carlos, visibly aged and with an expression of deep sadness in his eyes, spoke about the weight of guilt he had carried for decades. "My selfishness and my weakness were the spark that ignited this tragedy," Carlos said with a broken voice. "I betrayed Elena, my children, my family. And although I was not the one who pulled the trigger, I feel like my hands are stained with Elena's blood. There is not a day that I do not regret my actions and wish I could go back in time." Carlos also spoke about his relationship with his children after the tragedy. "Maria and Carlos Jr. are my only redemption," he said. "Despite all the pain I caused them, they have found the strength to move forward and build meaningful lives. Your forgiveness is more than I deserve, and I am infinitely grateful for it." The symposium also addressed the broader impact that the Guzman case had had on Mexican society. Sociologists and anthropologists discussed how the tragedy had led to a re-examination of family and social values in Mexico. Dr. Lucia Ramirez, a sociologist at UNAM, presented a study on how the case had influenced attitudes toward marriage and fidelity in Mexico. After the Guzman case, we saw an increase in couples seeking marriage therapy, he explained. We also noticed a change in the way society viewed infidelity. It went from something that was whispered in secret to a topic of open discussion. The symposium also included a session on the media impact of the case. Journalists who had originally covered the story shared their experiences and reflected on how the case had changed the way family crimes were reported in Mexico. Ricardo Fuentes, who had been a young reporter when the scandal broke, now editor of a major national newspaper, spoke about the responsibility of the media in covering such sensitive cases. The Guzman case was a turning point in Mexican journalism, he said. It made us question how to balance the public's right to know with the need to respect the privacy of victims and their families. At the end of the symposium, Maria Guzman closed the event with some words that resonated deeply with those in attendance. My family's tragedy is a reminder that behind every sensational headline, behind every case that fascinates the public, there are real people suffering real losses, he said. My hope is that by sharing our story, we can help others recognize and address the problems in their own families before it is too late. Maria's words caused a reflective silence in the audience. Many realized that, despite the years that had passed, the Guzman case continued to have the power to move, to teach, and to warn about the hidden dangers in seemingly perfect family relationships. As attendees left the auditorium, they carried with them not only new knowledge about a case that had fascinated Mexico for decades, but also a new appreciation for the complexity of human relationships and the fragility of family happiness. The legacy of the Guzman case, it became clear, would continue to influence Mexican society for years to come. It would serve as a constant reminder that love, loyalty, and trust are fragile treasures that must be cared for and nurtured, and that even the most close-knit families can be destroyed by secrets and betrayal. As the sun set over Monterrey that afternoon, casting long shadows over the city, the symposium participants dispersed, each carrying with them a piece of the Guzman story. A story that, 3 decades later, remained a powerful reminder of the complexity of the human heart and the unforeseen consequences of our actions. And so, the Guzman case, a tragedy that had begun on a May night 30 years ago, continued to write its legacy, page by page, in the collective conscience of a nation. An eternal reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, is always preferable to the most beautiful of lies.